Have you ever been erased? Not yelled at, not disowned with fireworks and drama, but quietly, strategically erased, like you never mattered in the first place, like you were an inconvenience to the image they were trying to protect. 3 weeks ago, my grandmother died. And not only was I not invited to the funeral, they told the funeral home I might be a security risk. That's how far they were willing to go to make sure I didn't say goodbye. This isn't just one of those revenge stories. This is what happens when you finally speak the truth, and your whole family decides that makes you the problem. The text came at 6:02 a.m. I was halfway through my first cup of stale coffee in my one-bedroom apartment when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognise. Miss Sarah Walsh, your presence is required at the reading of Margaret Walsh's last will and testament, 2:00 p.m. today. Urgent. I stared at it for a full minute, half expecting it to disappear like a prank. But it didn't. It sat there on my screen, daring me to believe it. I hadn't been invited to anything since Grandma died. Not the memorial, not the burial, not even the cold, bland family dinner afterward, where they probably toasted each other for surviving the drama. I wasn't just forgotten, I was cut out, blocked, silenced, branded as ungrateful, because at Thanksgiving, I finally said what nobody else had the guts to say. That Uncle Richard's investment firm was scamming old people, that my mother Joan was quietly funneling money from the church's building fund into her self-care spa retreats. That my cousins were running side hustles so shady, even the IRS would blush, and I, stupid, soft-hearted me, had the nerve to call them out, not at a press conference, not on social media, just at a family dinner. And for that, I became a threat. The thing is, I didn't yell, I didn't scream, I didn't even swear, which, considering the wine they'd already put away that night, was downright angelic. But I'd crossed a line, the unspoken rule: we don't expose each other, no matter how rotten we are, and because I broke that code of silence, they broke me. A week after Thanksgiving, I got a letter in the mail, registered no less, a restraining order, filed by the family, claiming I had threatened the health and safety of my grandmother, the same grandmother I used to visit every Sunday with hot tea and gossip magazines, the same woman who once whispered to me in the kitchen, "If they ever turn on you, sweetheart, you just remember, wolves stick together, but black sheep survive longer." I thought it was a metaphor. I didn't know it was a warning. So no, I hadn't expected a message from the lawyer. And even as I pulled into the parking lot of Peaton and Associates that afternoon, I was still half convinced someone was messing with me. The office was a restored Victorian tucked behind the Main Street courthouse. Its windows glowed amber with afternoon sun, and the red leaves outside looked like the ones I used to rake with Grandma every fall. For a second, I almost didn't get out of the car. What if they were in there? What if it was a trap, some cruel setup to humiliate me one last time? But then I remembered Grandma's cardigan, the one I'd knit for her, even though I could barely finish a scarf. She'd worn it for our last photo together. And Linda, my mother's sister, had laughed and said it looked like a Goodwill reject. Grandma had squeezed my hand under the table and said, "It's my favourite. Don't let them take your light, sweetheart." So I stepped out of the car. The door to the law office opened with a low chime, and for a moment, everything smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Then I heard it, my mother's voice, sharp, familiar, and dripping with that nasal blend of judgment and forced grace. "We already handled everything, Elias. The property, the accounts, the jewellery. There's no need for the will to be read formally." I froze just outside the conference room door. "You weren't invited for a reason," she added. My fingers curled around the phone in my coat pocket. I looked again at the text message. No, this wasn't a mistake. I raised my chin, pushed open the door, and walked straight into a room full of people who'd tried to erase me. And for the first time in 3 weeks, they couldn't pretend I didn't exist. The room froze the second I stepped in. My mother's fingers tightened around her coffee cup like she was bracing for an earthquake. My Aunt Linda straightened her spine so fast I heard something crack. And Richard, the great financial genius of the family, actually dropped his reading glasses into his lap. But it was Nina who spoke first. She stood up, all lip gloss and entitlement. What the hell is she doing here? Her chair scraped back so hard it echoed. No one moved, not even the lawyer. Camille, my youngest cousin, whispered something to Miles. He laughed under his breath. That laugh? I'd heard it before, the same one they used when they changed the Wi-Fi password on me during Thanksgiving and pretended it was an outage. The same one they used when they forgot to include me in the family group chat, then blamed me for never showing up. "Security," Nina called toward the hallway. "She's not supposed to be here." I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just held up my phone, showing the message. "I was invited," Richard scoffed. "By whom? We specifically told Mr. Peaton you were not family anymore." For a second, I almost turned around. But then the door behind me clicked, and Elias Peaton himself walked in, calm, silver-haired, holding a thick leather folder in both hands. "That invitation came from me," he said simply. You could feel the room shift, like someone pulled the air out of it. He nodded politely. "As the executor of Mrs. Walsh's estate, I have a legal obligation to read her will in the presence of all listed parties." Linda stepped forward, voice dripping sugar. "There must be a mistake. Mother had issues near the end. We've already handled everything as a family." I didn't mean to laugh, I really didn't, but it came out anyway, dry, bitter, disbelieving. "You handled everything? Without the one person who actually took care of her?" Joan snapped. "You threatened her." "No, I told her the truth," I replied. Miles muttered something about mental illness, and Camille rolled her eyes. "This is a waste of time," Linda sighed. "She hasn't been part of this family in months." That word, family, it always hits different when it's weaponized. Have you ever had someone say, "You're not family anymore"? Not because you did something unforgivable, but because you refused to forgive them. If you've been there, yeah. I know how that sits in your chest, like you're being asked to apologize for seeing things clearly. "You tried to destroy us," Richard said coldly. "I exposed the truth. That's not destruction, that's daylight." Nina snorted. "She's delusional. She probably thinks Grandma left her something." I didn't. I really didn't. I was just there because, for once, I wanted them to say it to my face, that I didn't matter, that I was disposable, that even in death I'd still be locked outside. I guess part of me still needed that closure. Or maybe, deep down, I was hoping Grandma had found a way to speak for herself one last time. "Enough," Mr. Peaton said sharply, placing the folder on the long walnut table. "We'll begin the reading now, if you'll all take your seats." No one moved, so I did. I walked slowly to the only empty chair, the one at the far end of the table, the chair clearly meant to stay empty. And I sat down. My mother looked away first. Linda looked furious. Nina looked like she'd tasted something sour. "You think you're better than us?" Camille hissed. "No," I said quietly. "I just refused to join the lie. And maybe that's the real reason they hate me, not because I said too much, but because I said it out loud." Tung tak tu nien, kam suk twatra chunthuk. If you've ever sat in a room full of people who once held you as a baby and now won't even look you in the eye, you know what I mean. If you've ever walked into a space where your name was erased, where your presence was treated like contamination, tell me, what did you do? Or maybe you didn't say anything. Maybe you just sat there like I did, trying not to cry, trying not to look small, trying to hold on to some part of yourself that they haven't broken yet. You're not alone, and you're not the crazy one. The room settled into a stiff, hostile silence. Mr. Peaton flipped open the leather folder with quiet precision. I could hear the paper crackling as he adjusted the documents. It sounded louder than it should have, like every noise was a reminder that I wasn't supposed to be there. This version of Mrs. Margaret Walsh's will, he began, was finalised 6 weeks before her passing, in my presence, and with supporting documentation verifying her full mental capacity. Linda didn't even wait 5 seconds before jumping in. She had dementia, Elias. She was confused all the time at the end. That's not true, I said too fast. She was sharp. We did the New York Times crossword together the week before she passed. Nina scoffed. Oh, please, you probably fed her the answers. You would know if you'd visited her, I snapped, then regretted it. Camille leaned back in her chair with an exaggerated sigh. This is pointless. The real will was already settled. We divided everything. The house, the accounts. Mom handled it all. Privately, I said under my breath. Excuse me, Linda's voice went icy. You divided it privately, as in behind closed doors, as in illegally. There it was again, that moment where they all looked at me like I'd farted at a funeral, like I had ruined the family decorum by daring to speak plainly. You know what? Miles muttered. Let's just get this over with. But Piton didn't open his mouth to read. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small silver laptop. He placed it in the centre of the table, turned it toward us, and hit play. The screen flickered, and then there she was, Grandma. Her face was a little thinner, her hair greyer, but her eyes still fierce. She sat in her armchair, wrapped in the knitted cardigan I'd given her the Christmas before, the one Linda said looked like a retirement home threw up. Hello, my dear ones, Grandma's voice filled the room. Someone, maybe Richard, exhaled through their nose like a pressure valve had just popped. If you're watching this, she said, then I've officially left the building, and you're probably gathered around like vultures, ready to pick the bones clean. Nina gasped. I watched Camille go pale. Let's talk about the missing elephant in the room, Grandma continued. Sarah. My throat tightened. I know they tried to keep you away, sweetheart. I know about the restraining order, the lies, the made-up threats. For the record, the only threat you ever posed was to their scams. Linda stood up. This is manipulated. She was obviously coached. This isn't... Sit down, Mr. Peaton said flatly. On screen, Grandma raised an eyebrow, as if she'd heard Linda through time and space. Yes, Linda, shut up and listen, for once in your greedy life. It was so quiet in the room, you could hear Camille's fake nails tapping against her phone case. I know about the church money, the Ponzi schemes, the fake handbags, the credit cards, the drugs. Don't bother denying it. She paused, as if giving them space to panic. Sarah was the only one brave enough to tell me the truth, the only one who didn't want something from me. So let me be very clear about my wishes. Mr. Peaton hit pause. Everyone flinched. Would you prefer I continue the video? He asked smoothly. Or simply read the will? No one answered. No one could. Very well, he continued, pulling out a printed document. To my son Richard, I leave the promotional brochures from his pyramid scheme, which I salvaged from his office trash bin. May they assist the federal investigation to come. Richard's face turned a violent shade of red. To my daughter Joan, I leave the empty church collection plate and a letter for Pastor Benjamin detailing the true location of the stolen building fund. Joan opened her mouth, then shut it. To Miles, I leave the stack of fraud alerts mailed to my address after he used my social security number to open 6 credit cards. Camille whispered, Oh my God. To Nina, I leave the authentic Hermes scarf she swapped for a fake. I hope she at least sold the real one for full price. To Camille, I leave nothing. She's already taken enough. I wasn't even breathing anymore. To my granddaughter, Sarah Walsh, Mr. Peaton paused, voice gentler now. I leave everything else. Everything. I looked around the room, at the people who had spent years picking at me like vultures. The silence was immediate, heavy. You could hear the grief, but not the kind that comes from love lost, the kind that comes from power slipping out of reach. I leave everything else to my granddaughter, Sarah Walsh. The words hung in the air like a suspended breath. Then the explosion came. "This is a joke," Nina snapped. "She manipulated her," Joan barked. "You people are out of your minds," Richard growled, slamming his hand on the table. The lawyer didn't flinch. Mr. Peaton simply adjusted his glasses, calm as ever, and pulled out another envelope from his briefcase. "Mrs. Walsh anticipated the likelihood of this reaction," he said smoothly. He opened the envelope, revealing a crisp legal document. Included in her final directives is a certified ownership transfer of the house on Ashgrove Lane. Effective immediately, Ms. Sarah Walsh is the sole legal owner of the property. All current occupants have been given 30 days to vacate. You could feel the panic sweep through the room like wildfire. Joan's voice shot up an octave. "She can't do that. That house has been in our family for generations." "And now it's in mine," I said softly. For a moment, I didn't recognize my own voice. It didn't shake. It didn't crack. It sounded firm, grounded, certain. Richard was already on his feet, pacing. "We'll contest. Elder abuse, undue influence. She was vulnerable. There's a video," Mr. Peaton cut in. "Shall we continue?" He pressed play. Grandma's voice filled the room again. "Now I know what you're thinking. You're going to claim I was mentally unfit. Say I was pressured. Say I didn't know what I was doing." The camera zoomed out slowly, revealing a full wall behind her, covered in documents, photos, screenshots. "So, let's get this out of the way." She stood up from her chair. I hadn't realized how frail she looked until that moment. But her voice, it didn't waver. "Richard, that's your office at midnight, isn't it? Accepting cash from the Pattersons who lost their house 2 months later. Joan, that's you outside the church safe room. And yes, I had the timestamp verified. Miles, every card you opened in my name has been logged. Nina, I tracked the delivery of my scarf to your resale account. Camille, well, honey, those pills don't sell themselves, do they?" The room was dead silent. "You see," she said, turning back to the camera, "Sarah doesn't know I have this evidence. She's too good to use it. But I'm not. I'm a bitter old woman with time, a private investigator, and nothing left to lose. Contest this will, and Mr. Peaton forwards everything to the authorities." She smiled, tired but satisfied. "Accept it, and your secrets die with me." Then the screen went black. Nobody moved, nobody blinked. I could almost hear their thoughts scraping together, trying to find an exit plan. "She can't threaten us like this," Richard muttered, but even he sounded unsure. "It's not a threat," Mr. Peaton said, closing the laptop. "It's legal insurance." For the first time in my life, I felt the ground shift under them, not me. I wasn't the target anymore. I wasn't the problem. I was the only one not covered in filth. Camille was the first to crack. "You set this up," she hissed at me. "You turned her against us." "I visited her," I replied. "I made her tea. I let her talk. That's it." Joan finally snapped. "Don't act like you're innocent. You were always difficult, always righteous, always trying to be better than us." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, Mom, I was just trying to be decent." Mr. Peaton cleared his throat. "There's one more item," he said, pulling out a slim folder. "Mrs. Walsh established a legal trust in Sarah's name, earmarked for the development of a non-profit aimed at assisting elderly fraud victims." He glanced at me. "She referred to it as Sarah's Shield, her way of putting power back where it belonged." Something broke inside me then. Not pain, not sadness, just release. She believed in me, even when I didn't. Even when I sat alone on my floor after being served a restraining order, crying into cold takeout. Even when I thought I'd been erased, forgotten, abandoned, she remembered. I stood up. "If anyone wants to challenge this, go ahead, but know this, Grandma had receipts, and so do I now." Richard was red-faced. Joan was crying without tears. Nina was texting someone furiously, probably her lawyer. "This isn't over," Miles muttered. I turned to Mr. Peaton. "Can we begin the paperwork for transfer?" Of course, he nodded. And I'll need signatures confirming notice of eviction for all current residents, per your rights as property owner. The words hit like a slap. To them, anyway. To me, they felt like peace. After everyone stormed out, slinging curses, empty threats, and promises of lawsuits over their shoulders, Mr. Peaton waited until the last door slammed shut. Then he reached into his briefcase once more and pulled out a small cream-coloured envelope. It had my name on it, in her handwriting. "Mrs. Walsh left this for you," he said quietly. "She asked me not to hand it over until after the will had been read." I took it with both hands. Carefully, reverently, the envelope still smelled like her, chamomile and wood polish, like afternoons at her kitchen table, flipping through crossword puzzles and gossip magazines with the radio humming low in the background. I held my breath and opened it. "My dearest Sarah, if you're holding this, then they've already tried to turn this day into a battleground. I'm sorry for that, but not surprised. I know your heart, sweet girl. I know how deeply you feel things. I know you're probably sitting there right now, fighting the guilt rising in your chest, wondering if maybe you should have given them one more chance. That's why I wrote this, so let me say it as clearly as I can. You don't owe them anything, not forgiveness, not understanding, not a seat at your table. They had their chances. Every birthday they skipped, every holiday they made about themselves, every time they watched you bring me tea and sneered behind your back. They had chances, years of them, and what did they do? They mocked your kindness. They tried to ruin your reputation. They kicked you out when you spoke the truth. That wasn't love, Sarah. That was survival for them. Keeping their secrets intact was more important than keeping you in the family. But you didn't break. Even when they left you alone on Christmas, even when they filed that cruel restraining order, even when you sat in your apartment thinking maybe you were the problem, you kept showing up for me, for what was right. You were the only one who didn't ask me for money or favours or property. You asked me how I was sleeping. You brought me silly books and old music. You listened. So no, I'm not giving you their inheritance, I'm giving you mine. Everything I worked for, everything I saved, every secret I gathered. I give it to you because I trust you to do something they never could. Use it for good. Start that non-profit you always dreamed of. Help those sweet people Richard scammed. Build something that doesn't hurt people just to keep the lights on. And if the guilt creeps back in, because I know it will, read this line again. You did nothing wrong. They made their choices. Now you get to make yours. Use the money, use the house, use my name if it helps. And know this, if you ever feel alone again, I hope you'll remember what I told you that night in the kitchen. Don't let them dim your light, sweetheart. Sometimes the black sheep is the only one who isn't a wolf. All my love, Grandma. I didn't cry right away. I sat there holding the letter to my chest, letting the weight of it sink in, letting her sink in. Because the truth is, I'd spent the last few years wondering if I was crazy, if I was too sensitive, too holier than thou, if maybe the reason I never fit in was because there was something broken in me. But now I realized I didn't fit in because I was never meant to. I was never meant to belong to people who wore cruelty like perfume, never meant to trade my conscience for comfort. And Grandma knew that. She saw it before I did. Mr. Peaton gave me a moment before clearing his throat gently. "We'll need to begin the transfer process formally," he said, "unless you'd like to take a few days—" "No," I interrupted. "I'm ready." He smiled, something soft and approving behind his eyes. "She talked about you all the time, you know, said you were the only one who inherited her conscience, along with her eyes." I blinked fast, trying not to break open all over again. We signed papers, lots of them, house title, bank transfers, security deposit box access, and finally the trust. It was real. $4.7 million worth of real, and yet none of it felt as valuable as the line in that letter, "You didn't break." By the time I stepped out of the office, the sun was low. Orange light spilled across the sidewalk. The wind had picked up, tugging gently at my sleeves like a reminder. Go forward. I sat in my beat-up Honda for a long time. Not because I didn't want to drive away, but because I finally could. There was no guilt pulling me backward, no half-open wounds waiting for their apology, just freedom and a mission. The house on Ashgrove Lane looked exactly the same. White shutters, red brick steps, the faded welcome mat that had sat out too many winters. But when I walked up that day, keys in my pocket, deed in my name, it felt completely different. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't invisible, that someone had been watching, had seen the pain behind the polite silence I'd been forced to wear for so long. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. No one was there to greet me, but the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. It smelled like her. I walked past the dining room, the same table where my cousins once laughed at the cardigan I gave Grandma, into the living room where the fireplace still held her favourite rocking chair. And I sat. For a long time, I just let it wash over me. The quiet, the grief, the strange comfort of finally being somewhere that once rejected me, and realising I didn't need their approval to claim it. I was home. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. 12 new texts. Joan, this isn't right. You know your grandmother wasn't well. Richard, we'll see you in court. Nina, hope you enjoy living alone. Don't expect us to show up when your life falls apart. Camille, you were always the saddest one of us. Don't forget that. And then, one more, unknown number. Heard the news. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you were the best of them. Mrs. Patterson. I stared at that last one longer than I meant to. The Pattersons had lost everything because of Richard. Their home, their retirement. I remembered them, quiet, kind, always gave Grandma cookies when I visited her. And now, they knew. They knew I hadn't just endured this family, I had finally stood up to them. A few days later, the eviction notices went out. Legal, formal, 30 days to vacate. Joan tried to pretend she didn't see the envelope taped to the door. Richard emailed Mr. Peaton 8 times in one day. Nina posted something vague and dramatic on Instagram. Betrayal always comes from those you call family. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't have to. The law was on my side now. But more than that, so was the truth. 2 weeks in, I got a knock on the door. Camille. Makeup perfect, tone falsely sweet. Hey, just wanted to stop by. No hard feelings, right? We were thinking maybe you'd let us use the house for Emma's graduation party. I stared at her. You tried to have me arrested for sending Grandma flowers. She blinked. It was a misunderstanding. You said I was dangerous, mentally unstable, that I threatened an old woman who raised me. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then gave a tight, forced laugh. You're really going to be like this forever, huh? No, I said. I'm going to be free forever. Big difference. I closed the door. I didn't slam it, didn't scream, just closed it, quiet, final. That night, I opened the locked safe deposit boxes Mr. Peaton had transferred to me. Inside were letters, photos, old trinkets, and a flash drive labelled "For Sarah, when you're ready." I plugged it in. It was video files, Grandma, months before she passed, documenting stories I'd never heard. Her regrets, her memories, her advice. But the last video was short, just her, in her garden, wind in her hair. You know what the hardest part was, she said to the camera, watching you try so hard to be loved by people who didn't deserve you. But now you get to love yourself. That's the best revenge there is. I sat back in my chair, let the tears come this time, not out of grief, but out of release. The next morning, I called my old mentor from the non-profit network, told her I had seed funding, a name, a story. We filed the paperwork for Sarah's shield the next day, a foundation in Grandma's name, funded entirely by her trust, to help elderly victims of financial exploitation, to make sure no one like Mrs. Patterson ever has to feel powerless again. I didn't go to Camille's party, didn't answer when Joan called again 2 weeks later, crying into voicemail. Instead, I stood in Grandma's old garden, planted lavender, pulled weeds, let the sun hit my skin without apology? Have you ever been told that you're the problem just because you spoke the truth? Have you ever been cut off, not for hurting someone, but for refusing to stay silent? Yeah, you're not alone. You never were. So if this story hit you somewhere deep, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or are still crawling your way out of, tell me, what helped you get through it? And if you're still in the thick of it, still standing on the edge of your family's silence, just know you're not broken, you're not unlovable, you're just finally refusing to be their scapegoat. And that's the beginning of everything.